I've owned Mastiffs for about 20 years now, of all different forms. I've also trained. I do rescue. I've owned many other breeds. I have a Bull Terrier Doberman standing in front of me right now. I have a Bull Terrier right behind me, in fact. I not only love my Neapolitan Mastiffs, but I enjoy many breeds and have owned quite a few different breeds throughout the years. I would consider myself, in a way, a functional hoarder because I have 11 in this house right now. That's just being kind of tongue-in-cheek, but, I have 2 that are with me right now who are boarding. Oh, my old dog is about to get on the couch, actually. This is just to kind of show. This is my old dog. He's your Doberman dog I used to work many years ago, but he's 13. I actually went to a dog show and put my hands on a couple Neos at that show, and then I was set. That's what I wanted to get into. I saw some definite need within the breed to want to kind of pull back and go back to a little bit more of what the original purpose was, as well as type. Now, when I talk about type in my breed type for Neapolitans is the wrinkles, that loose skin, and bone. Of course, being into Neapolitans, I have to say that obviously I have no issue with wrinkles or bone because if I did, I would have corsos, but I didn't want something that would affect the dog's life. And I saw a lot of dogs that they couldn't see because they had too much skin or they needed a lot of upkeep. So I kind of started pulling back, even in my own program, because I've had typey dogs. I own typey dogs now, but I use them as a part of my puzzle and select accordingly off of each generation towards a little bit more of the, I would say, like the late 80s, early 90s dog. I still want some wrinkle so that there is some separation between my breed within Neos and then the Corsi, which are basically a sister breed to mine. Because, of course, I prefer to work dogs. I also want dogs to perform. So I do some endurance trials. I do drag work. I live on a farm. We have a little over 30 acres. So I want dogs who can be dogs first and foremost. I don't really want a dog that I have to bathe every 2 weeks and constantly clean out their eyes. That's just doesn't interest me. Now, many years later, I'm closer to the dogs that I'm looking for. Bosco, which is chemical warfare. He's actually retired from working now. He's 7, but I've been working him for the last 5-6 years, and he's probably closest to what I'm trying to get towards. Mm-hmm. And I think some of the pictures that you used were quite a bit of him. And then his sister, Chupacabra. I've actually, one of my closest friends, she breeds Corsi, and I've had one in the house with me from her last breeding, and it was interesting to see the differences. One of the things that I have noticed between the 2 breeds is the Corso, people have selected for very specific purposes. So the dog's brain is kind of set in a certain fashion, where the Neo, one of the reasons why I was drawn to the Neo in the first place is they're one of the most intelligent Mastiffs that I've come across. And I think the reason being is because people really haven't messed with their brains and been kind of focusing on very specific capabilities. So the Neo is kind of the dog that people would just have, and it would kind of roam around and be in the yard or be in the house, but they didn't select for a sole purpose. And I find that the Corso, they're very nice dogs, but they don't have the same mind as, which, not to say that positive or negative for someone else, but for me, I really like the mind of the Neo more than any other dog I've come across. One of the things that I have noticed is the Corso obviously is smaller in general, but then they have a little bit more ability because of that. And it's one of the things that I personally try to pull back and strive towards because I don't want to lose ability because of size. I want the dog to be able to perform. If 120 pound dog can do it, then I want to be able to pull back towards closer to a slightly smaller dog and not have an 80-pound dog can't climb, 4 feet. Obviously, the head type is definitely different. The body structure is also different. We call for a longer body. We're still a little bit more shorter back than our breed. In general, you can find both of the dogs within each other. You can see Neo, if you look at Bosco's head planes, he has head planes closer to a Corso. And then you can see Corsos all day long that look like Neos because they came out of the same litter at one point. They were the same dog, just selected away from each other for different purposes.
And I'm sure there's a lot of people using Neos in their Corso programs still to this day.
The Corso and the Neo is basically a band dog on pedigree. So depending on where the dogs were from dictates what was used behind them. So, if you're looking at Brazilian dogs first, dogs from Italy first, dogs from Spain even, and here, there's been different dogs used within them. And I have no problem with that. I'm here to tell you, I do not care. I want to look at the dog itself and be able to see what it is. I obviously want my dogs to look like Neos. I don't want them to look like Rottweilers. If I wanted them to look like Rottweilers, I would have a Rottweiler. But I'm not sitting here saying that we should all turn around and start outcrossing, bringing in a ton of different issues, because every time you outcross, you are potentially bringing in issues from another breed. But in the same flip of the coin, I can see a lot of differences within each breed and within my own. Every time I import or bring a dog in, depending on where it's from, I kind of bank on the fact that I may be bringing in something else with it. Mm-hmm. I find that over the years, I try my hardest not to burn bridges with anyone because I use show dogs all day long. I show my dogs as well. And I use typey dogs. So I am the first one to tell you that the dog world is very small and people pay attention. And people remember there is a flush of people about every 7 years. There's people who stick around. So you have to be careful with what you do within the breed, because if you burn one bridge, you may not be able to cross the next, because that could have been their friend. I try to just enjoy my dogs and focus on what I'm trying to do and say please and thank you every time I need to use someone else's stock. I had very little issues within the breed. Cancer. Obviously, I'd like a little bit more longevity within the breed too, but cancer has been the most difficult thing for me. And just all different kinds of cancer. I've ran into something as strange as lung cancer, which obviously is odd within dogs. But the breed in general, I find that if you're able to put your head down and just move forward and find some like-minded individuals, you can get a group of people. I mean, it's taken me years. Like I said, there was a time when I couldn't find anyone who wanted to work with me because of wanting to work with me. There's actually quite a few people who are wanting to do more with their dogs. And I mean, for me, I don't care if you're doing nose work, if you're doing tracking, or if you're just do something. Do something with them. I love doing nose work. It's one of my favorites. Actually, Bosco's the title nose work champion. Tomorrow we're going to a seminar for nose work. Dogs really enjoy it. It lets them use their brain. Okay, so are we going to talk about the fantasy end, or do you want to talk about what my opinion on the real deal would be? The fantasy end is, for me, they believe that it was just resurrected off a couple dogs. And it was one of the original Masters, the original Coliseum dog. Okay, I'm a Neo lover, but let's be real here. There's little chance of a Neo on how they look today being a dog that they would use during the Coliseum. I would believe that it would be something far more cat-like in a lot of ways, something that would be less upkeep, less feed. That's definite when you're working with the Mastiffs. I go through 2 to 4 40-pound bags of food a week, depending on if I'm feeding any raw mixed in. So I don't see dogs like that being used, naming quite a few. And a lot would make far more sense. So the Neo is a land race. That's how it started. Same with the Corso. It was a dog that was basically a dog that had a specific look that lived in the area that people used on farms. They use them for all different purposes. You can find articles where they're talking about having them build carts. You can find articles where they're talking about just like gentlemen's games. basically where they would have the dogs bite on a rope, pull the rope up on a balcony and see how long the dog would hold onto the rope. That would be totally something I would see a couple of Italian men sit around and do while they're drinking their espresso. But generally, when you go over there, what you see is you see yards and you see fencing. And the reason being is because it's very common for gypsies to go through areas as they're traveling, and they basically will strip anything of worth out of your yard or out of your house if they can get to it. So the Neo was made to be kept in the places to keep people from coming in and taking things from them. Where the Corso, the separation was the Corso went to the farm, it went and worked in the farm and helped doing farm chores. The Neo was the estate dog that was kept at the house, basically chained up, just told to go over there, stay out of the way, but keep other people from coming in and taking their stuff. And that's basically what the majority of it was. As soon as the breed was created, it started to be shown over there, and they started kind of getting together and doing different things. Originally, the dog was not supposed to be touched. They weren't checking the bite. They were looking at them physically, how their body was built, their overall appearance, and the temperament was supposed to be in some ways very similar to an LGD, defensive.
Mm-hmm.
So you weren't putting your hands in their mouth. Obviously, over the years, because of registries and showing, they have changed the temperament a bit to make it a little bit more handleable for the general public. They were always supposed to be, and they still are. Most breeders are very special. I am the same way. I have a daughter. They're supposed to be good with children. First and foremost, they're supposed to be good family dogs. They should be able to be kept within the house and allow their people around. It's funny because if you're around, they're fine with people coming in and out. If you introduce them, they're like, okay, cool. But if you're not here, even my father, they don't I want him in the house. They won't allow him in the house. They'll bounce off the windows. As soon as I walk up, it's totally fine. They take it very seriously. And that's how they're supposed to be. They're supposed to want to protect their property. One of the things that I find about them is anything they touch in their mind, they feel like they own it, which makes them good at that job because they're like, well, this is mine. And since this is mine, I have to own it. And so their house, they guard it. Their yard, they guard it. They're better off property in that way, because it's not theirs. And if you're out and moving and out and about, they're pretty stoic. They're supposed to be not overly friendly, but allow you to walk up and allow you to say hi. And that's kind of what I like. I like the dog that, I'm not having to drag away from other people. At the same turn, isn't running up and acting like a retriever.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We'll see. It depends on the line. I have aggressive even within my pack, so I am very careful with who goes together. They're known to be same-sex aggressive. I find that you can tell fairly young how they're going to be as an adult. So when I saw a dog, I placed them accordingly. Some are completely fine pretty early. Others, you can also tell fairly early they're not. Like Bosco's litter, for example, that litter was probably one of my more sharp litters. At 5 weeks, I had them in crates because they were drawing blood on each other. And when I was trying to break up the fights, they were fighting me just the same, 5 weeks old. And if I would have left them together, they would have killed each other. I always, when I'm placing dogs, I won't place them in homes typically if they have same sex, unless there is a large size difference, and that dog is going to follow. If the Neos want to be the groups. So if you're going to place them with another dominant breed, you're going to have problems. If you're going to place them with a breed who's like, cool, whatever, you can be boss, it's fine. It depends on the dog, of course. And Aragon, for example, he was pretty low-key and not dog-aggressive. Anything that I've had out of the Panzano line has been a little bit more sharp. But I like that. The Anachronismo, the De La Bahia, that is, I find, a little bit sharper of the lines. And you can see some pretty short Castalacho dogs. But then, if you're looking at Delgano, which is of the melting pot, those are a little bit more low key. So you're able to kind of select accordingly. I have one female who's just fantastic. I could put her just about with anyone. And those are nice dogs to have around. She still turns on. She reacts accordingly, but just doesn't have that need to want to fight. Where Britannia, my oldest Neo, she's 10. That's Bosco and Chupacabra's mom. That's what her goal in life is. She would like to fight everyone and be the dog on the top of the pile. I'm still now at 10. I have a granddaughter, and she's about the same way. So it's difficult because coming from pit bulls and dealing with that early on, and then moving on to a much larger breed who has the same reactions, I'm like, it's so interesting because you see so many breeds that correlate. And even though that this isn't as much talked about within Neos, it's there. They're much happier being one or two dogs in the house than being in a pack. No, you can't. It's genetic. It truly is. I'm here to tell you, as someone who's had a lot of different breeds, you can't stop it. And what I've even found about the use, obviously, I've bred to dogs who don't even have that within them. It still comes out. And I find that it follows a specific look within my dogs. I can tell pretty early on the ones that have carried a look from Britannia, and then another dog that I use, Queso, who also brought that on. That's actually Bosco's father. I'm right off the bat, like Pork Chop, one of my youngest females who I work. She's very dog aggressive, and you can tell. And it is what it is. You just, as a dog person, you work around that, and it doesn't change how you train them. Dogs don't need other dog friends. They need us. They want to be with us as humans. The whole thing where everyone thinks that your dog needs to go to the dog park and play with other dogs is us humanizing our animals. I run a kennel, so for the safety of my animals, they're in 6x8 runs, and they go out with their specific partners, if anyone. And I have dogs who don't go out with anyone, and they're fine with that. They don't want to be with anyone because that's how their mind is set up. And I'm okay with that. And I think other people should be okay too. If you're getting into a breed, you should know that breed. And if there's something that you don't like about it, why are you going to go into it and try to change it? Go towards another breed. There's thousands of them. Mm-hmm. I've had dogs my whole life. I grew up with gun dogs. I come from a hunting family. My dad hunts, and my husband hunts. Everyone throughout my life, we had bird dogs, spaniels, retrievers. And the first time I came across a Mastiff, actually, my aunt and uncle purchased one when I was a child. And I fell in love with this bull Mastiff. And I'm going to have Mastiffs when I'm older. My parents were like, well, we're not going to have a dog like that in our house. No. We hunt, and that dog is not going to live here. No. So about 17, I got involved into pit bull rescue. And I worked throughout Pontiac and smaller cities in that area, going door to door, helping with people who entertain animals properly, essentially, and making sure that the dogs had their basic needs met. In there, 18, I had my own place, and I got my first dog, and it was Bordeaux. I Bordeaux's for a bit, and then I've had English Mastiffs, English Mastiffs, and I've had a Central Asian. And I've always had dogs and animals. I've always had exotics. Probably I'm a little bit more, probably why I've also been pulled towards, I like different types of animals. I've had pitchers, sugar gliders, raccoons, lots of raccoons. I also held a permit to hold wildlife in captivity. I really like working with wildlife, just because domesticated animals have a very specific mind, and we've cultivated that type of mind where they want to work with you and they want to bend towards your command. Where wildlife does not have that at all. Mm-hmm. So totally different type of mind, and you have to kind of work with them. And in a lot of ways, working with another human. You can't, if I have 20 chickens outside too, and cat, and like I said, 11 dogs. We have a sugar glider and a couple birds. So you'd never know. Right now, everyone's being quiet for some reason. Like
That's great.
I've always had a passion towards animals. I've always done rescue towards breeding over the last. For me, I wanted to help a breed, and I wanted to work within a breed. And I feel like with pits, there's enough people in there who are very engrossed into the breed and doing quite well. There's so many of them in my area that I almost felt bad producing anymore. So I moved away from that. Plus, I liked the larger dog, and I liked the mind. And Neo is probably one of the more, I mean, that LGDs are probably one of the most intelligent dogs. And I feel that a lot of that has to do with humans not changing them as much. And I find that Neos for Mastiffs are very intelligent. I like that. And I like that the work that I have to involve into them to get them to want to do my bidding.
Right. Can you talk about like what is the AKC standards now?
Sure. Honestly, it's funny because our breed standard is very open. So, the main things that it asks for is that you have a minimum of 3 wrinkles on the nose. It doesn't talk about how deep the wrinkles are. Do not apron do that, because the apron dewlap is what the English Mastiff has. When I'm speaking of a dewlap, it's the folds under the lips, essentially. Our breed standard, also calls for, obviously, cat-like feet. A lot of people don't understand or interpret that properly, so we end up with a lot of large splayed feet. They should still be well-knuckled, because that's what holds up your dog. I really find that a lot of people don't pay attention in all breeds to the dog's feet. Feet are very important for any type of working animal. We look for a longer bodied animal than what you'd see with a Corso, a little bit lower of a tail set as well. I remove the ears. It's a preference of mine, but with the ears, we look for triangles that sit right, no lower than the jawline. They call for eyes being deep set. My preference is I actually breed towards a little bit more of a surfaced eye. If you can't see the dog's eye, it can't see you. If the eyes are deeply set with skin folds around them, I find that creates kind of like horse blinders. Especially for someone who wants to work a dog, blinders are not the best thing. You want the dog to be able to see, all around it, so that it's able to bite properly and react properly, and also not get startled because you happen to walk on the side of it. Our head type is what we ask for is the muzzle should be a box within the box. So the head should be square, and then the muzzle is a square as well. We don't look for converging or diverging muzzle. We want parallel. Length of the muzzle, you see a lot of differences. I actually like a little more length in my muzzle because of the fact that, the shorter the muzzle, the less teeth you're going to have, more chances of having breathing issues, which I as someone who wants to work a dog, obviously that's not something I want to go towards. Our breed, typically you're going to see them somewhere between about 28 and 31 inches tall. I also find that as in all breeds, people like to exaggerate the size, but typically Neos are going to be somewhere between 120 and 160 on average. Of course, there's been dogs that have been over 200 pounds. I've produced dogs that are under 100 pounds. The original Neo was never 180 pounds. They were smaller. So sometimes you get those throwbacks and you're like, okay, that's a 90-pound dog. As long as it's balanced within its body, I don't care about its weight. I think that there's way too much focus on a dog's size. If you're focusing on the size and not focusing on the structure, there's definitely problems. The body has to be able to hold up that weight. We ask for a flat top line, and we do like angulation within our rear. The top line, really tells you too where the faults are within the dog. So if you're paying attention to the top line of an animal, typically if you see a dog that's roached, you're going to see a bad rear. Depending on where the break is within that top line, it will tell you. We ask for a strong chest. We want a nice wide dog. You'll see bone, which is like, the size of the leg. It will vary within my breed. It's not really called within the standard. They just want the dog to carry substance. So you'll see a lot of variation depending on that dog and its line. Color, we have wide variation in colors. We have blue, black, which are the more traditional colors. Because the dog, per the standard, they were supposed to be able to kind of disappear within the night. So if you're having a dog that's supposed to disappear while it's on sentry duty, then you don't want a dog that is tawny, because tawny's blonde, by the way. That color almost glows. Our tawny color, they lose all pigmentation. They're very, very pale skin, and kind of almost like a Weimaraner color. It's very bright. And then we also have mahogany, which is kind of a brown, opposed to like the Dogue de Bordeaux's red. We do not want mask on any of those colors. There should be no masks. We accept brindling in every color, white on the feet, white on the chest, but no white above the lip.
Interesting. I don't think I've seen a brindle. Maybe I have, but yeah.
I'm sure you have. It's just they're not known to be heavily. I've had brindled Neos, Jay, Mastiff with brindled, with brindled. Actually, the black female, Elysium, I think you had her video up where she was playing with the ball. She's brindled.
Okay.
She's just not heavily brindled. Typically, the more heavily brindled would be like a reverse brindle, and it almost looks like an English Mastiff coat. That's not a preference in color for us. You'll just see some stripes, quote unquote, just in small pieces throughout the coat.
How was your reception in the working dog community when you brought your Neos out for protection work?
Well, I work within a club, so the first time I showed up, previous to being a club, I'm a small woman. I weigh $120 dripping wet. I showed up with Dragon was the first male Neo I worked, and the woman told me I worked with a woman named Cheryl Carlson. She's a very long time, I want to say dogman, but she's probably one of the most old school dog people around anymore. She's awesome. She does German Shepherds, Malinois, and Dutchies, and part of her club now, which is Capital City Dog Sports. But when I showed up, the first thing she said was, if you drop that leash, you're off this field and I won't work your dog.
Right.
So, of course, me, I'm sweating bullets, because I'm like, man, I'm going to have to hold on to this animal come hell or high water. And I've been dragged down. I have slid through the mud, and I have never let go of a leash to date ever. It's hard, because I kind of walk the fence between the working community and show community. And on both sides, people kind of just grumble at me. In the working community, actually Corso people have kind of been some of the roughest people, because they're like, well, Neos aren't supposed to. If your dog works, it's a Corso. Your dog looks like a Corso. And it's like, just because a dog has lighter type doesn't mean it's a Corso. Just because a Corso has heavy type, it doesn't make it a Neo. There's very specific differences between each breed now. They're different dogs. That's the cool thing about dog genetics, is they're very easy to manipulate. And we've changed them throughout the years. And within the working community, I've been now working them for quite some time. In my small area, people know me and people know my dogs, and they love my dogs, and they're happy to see a Neo out working. Dog forums, I used to get a little bit of grief, and Facebook, of course, people are like, well, Neos don't work. You're not working your dogs, you're just doing line work. And I'm like, okay, yeah, this is a trial. And of course, I must be doing line work at a trial because that makes sense. Unfortunately, with Neos, it's like working Clydesdales. So my dogs are never going to work like a Malinois because they're not a Malinois. They're going to work like their breed's going to work. They're big, they're cumbersome. It's definitely a different animal. They're kind of like, if you're thinking about it in like human form, they would be like your, I don't want to say a sumo wrestler in a lot of ways, but they're going to be your heavy guys. They're going to be your bigger men opposed to your smaller, lighter, more agile, jiu-jitsu fighters. It's totally different people. Obviously you're not going to put those two people together and think that they're going to be able to do the exact same things. But I try my hardest, and I work my dogs right next to Malinois and Dutchies and Shepherds because I want my dogs to be able to compete with them. I want to be able to be on that same level, full well knowing that, my dog's never going to, fly over a 10-foot wall. They're picking up a pretty large body. Oh, it's definitely a different animal, and in some ways you'll sit there and be like, wow, I wish my dog could do that, but I don't have, like if you look at the bull terrier in the cage, I don't know if you can, you can't see her because she's this dog back here. She can climb over a 10-foot wall like that, but she weighs 30 pounds. So it's definitely a different animal, and it's interesting to see the differences within each breed. And I love those, I don't think that there's anything wrong, because if somebody wants very specific things that a Malinois offers, they should have a Malinois. I personally like the home defense dog that I can have out and about with me that isn't going to be pacing my house and crying all day.
Yeah, I agree. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I feel like it should be the thing that, be it show, be it working. If we have a working breed, if our breed is supposed to be a working breed, they should be able to compete within, the show ring as well as, on the field. So it's my personal preference. Now, one thing I want to make sure that I mention is skin doesn't dictate health. The Neos who have a lot of loose skin, it does not make them unhealthy. I've seen just as many Neos who are very tight-skinned who are sick. It's the genetics behind them. I have dogs downstairs right now who are typey. If you look at Bosco's blueprints, he came from a dog who was international champion in 2 countries. And his mom, I didn't show her because she's so dog aggressive and it would be difficult. But her sister is one of the most titled show champions in the United States. And I think there was like 4 or 5 other dogs within that litter who were, and both her parents were champions. I use show dogs in my dogs. But what I do is I don't line breed. I try to just keep outcrossing because I want to keep the inbred coefficiency levels percentage at a lower level. And I find that with every generation, the dog wants to go back to what is more natural for it. Because we push out those more unnatural appearance looks because that's the separations within each breed. But, if you think about it and you go to somewhere like Jamaica and you look at the pariah dogs running around, those were at one point a retriever and a Springer Spaniel and maybe a Mastiff. What happened was they just, over generations, they bred to what came back to what was more natural to them. And that's kind of what I'm doing in some ways, is I'm just, for me, my personal goals and what I'm selecting towards, I just select towards what is more natural. Now, I, again, have no qualms with dogs who have type or lacking type. They're all Neos to me, as long as they fit still within that standard. And, like I said, the standard is very, very broad. It's left up to interpretation of the person who's reading it. You probably have one of the most broad standards there is, actually.
Interesting. How do they handle the cold weather up there in Michigan?
Fine. I'm outside. We've got 30 acres, so I'm outside quite a bit with them, and I'm out walking. And the only thing is just like any other dog, is their feet. I have to watch and pay attention when their feet start to freeze. I have to at least grab them and warm them up for a little while when we get going. But they don't have a lot of issues with heat or cold. I don't run into a lot of problems with that. I've worked dogs in 90-degree weather and 12. It's really me and my comfort level more than anything, and if I want to be out there. But they love the snow. They're completely fine with it. Now, like right now, with it being so cold, I'm not leaving them out in the outdoor runs as long. If I'm gone all day, they're not all out because I think it was like the wind chill this morning was -10. A little chilly, but I'm here to tell you, I don't really run into much of heat exhaustion issues or cold weather issues. But in general, I find that they're a fairly hardy dog. The biggest thing that is probably one of the more common things within the breed is cherry eye. I also don't run into that very much, but I am very particular about the eyes. And I also know that if my dog's eyes look like they're getting an infection, to start treating them. I think that a lot of people have ruptures of the gland because there's an infection that goes unchecked. When you have a dog that has, a lot of people will call that haw, but that's not the haw. When you see that pink hanging down, that's actually the conjunctiva. It's there with every dog, but because of the skin pulling, you can see it on Neo, a little bit looser. The haw is actually just that very small fold that's close to the eye. But what I find is that's like an open bowl, essentially. So if you're in an area that's very dusty, lots of pollen, that bowl is going to catch different organisms in it, and they could irritate the eye. So if I find that I see a dog that has an irritation, what do? I go to my kitchen, I pull out some lube, and I treat the eye for a couple of days. And I really don't run into any issues, but I also have bred towards a tighter, cleaner eye and less, open conjunctiva because of that. I prefer, obviously, as minimal maintenance as possible. When I place a dog with a client, for example, I don't want to tell them, expect this. You're going to pay for a cherry eye. You're going to need to have the, skin pulled up because it's going to have ectropion. I want to sell a dog and have that dog go there and just have to go to the vets for vaccinations and a health check. So I find that, that right there is an easy fix and can be fixed just with one generation. Average is between 8 and 10, which I don't like. I'm really trying to get double digits on a normal basis. I moved away from kind of the first group of dogs I was working with 6-7 years ago now, and they had a little bit shorter of a lifespan, where these guys, Britannia's mom lived 12, almost 13. And that, for me, that's kind of where I'm trying. My goals are to be around that age. I'm finding that it seems like between 8 and 10, they'll get osteosarcoma or some type of cancer. It's like cancer, and then they're gone within 6 months. And that's been one of the more frustrating aspects for me because I want longer. It could be vaccinations, over-vaccinating, something, because that has been probably the more frustrating aspect. I really haven't ran into bloat. I know that people talk about bloat a lot. I don't do anything to try to stop bloat. I feed on the ground. I give giant buckets of water when they go outside because I don't give water inside. I feed one meal a day. Cancer has been the worst for me, and it seems like between 8 and 10. I have fed raw, complete raw. I've done 60-40. Right now, I'm doing mainly kibble, mainly because of the fact that I just don't have enough hours in the day. Make sure you're getting the ratios correct. You have to make sure you're getting the proper vitamins. meat to fat. There's quite a bit that goes into it if you're doing it right. And I unfortunately couldn't put in enough time in the day to make sure that I was doing that appropriately. And I do feed raw, but it's just not my main source of nutrition for them. So I feed Pro Plan. I do salmon, and I consider that a middle of the way food. I am a big believer. I don't want to make a hothouse flour. And with that being said, I don't want dogs that have to be fed a very specific high-end food to look good. I want my dogs to be able to basically thrive on a normal environment with a normal life and just average food, because that's 90% of home. Of course, you have those people who are going to go for $90 for a bag of food. I'm not. 45 is about my limit for a bag of food. So I feed about somewhere between 12 and 1,500 calories per day, depending on the work. Now, my dogs who are being worked heavily, I might go up to 1,800 calories. Teenagers, too. I do just Pro Plan. I do split a can of wet Pro Plan amongst the group to hide pills if I need to throw pills in once in a while. And then everyone gets eggs because I have chickens. So I do a raw egg with a shell right in the food every day. If you're cooking it, it doesn't matter, but there's an enzyme within the raw egg that will actually deplete calcium out of the dog if you're feeding it daily. Okay. So the shell counteracts that enzyme. So if you're only going to do it a couple times a week, it's no big. That in the daily, as a food source, you want to always make sure you feed the shell. So I give it to them, egg in the shell, in their food, setting on top, and they get to break it all up all on their own. I do chicken too. I do if we have deer, I get venison. When we're cleaning out like all of our last year's meat, everyone's getting meat during that time mixed in with your kibble. But I mainly feed just basic Pro Plan. Adults are again, it depends on the size of the dog, but like Bosco, just use him as an example because people have seen him in the videos. Bosco eats 5 cups of kibble a day. That's it. 5 cups of kibble and a tablespoon of wet food, and I mix a little water in it. That's his meal a day. Now I have a young female here. She's a little over a year old. Her metabolism is working differently, and she needs a lot more food. Now I have a Bosco son here who's 6 months, and he is eating 8 cups a day right now. I find that between 2 and 3, I have, you back way off on the food because they're not growing as much. It's always shocking to me when you think about the fact that we're asking a dog to grow the size of an adult male human in 2 years. They do it because, when you think about it, a man takes 18 years to 24 years to be his weight, whatever that weight may be, his healthy weight. With Neos, we tell people it's height by 2 and width by 3. So by 3 years old, they have done everything that our body does in 20. Mm-hmm. So by 2 to 3, you back off from food and you're normally somewhere between. Most of my females eat 4 cups a day. They don't take a lot of food. Now I hear of people who feed 12, 14, 15 cups a day. And I want to know what their dog's poop looks like because I bet you it looks like water soup cans because you're feeding them so much. Sure, a dog will eat it. But do you truly need to feed them so much? Because I see a lot of obese dogs running around. And it's I warranty my dogs. I put a 2-year health contract on them. And the one thing that I can tell you that voids a contract is finding a dog that's obese. Because how am I going to warranty your dog's hips and elbows if your dog is carrying an extra 30 to 40 pounds on those hips and elbows? I find that a lot of that, again, goes to genetics. When you think about humans, you can see people who are great and who eat like crap, and people who eat great like crap. I think it's very similar with dogs, if you're selecting towards a more athletic animal and you give them enough nutrients, and you don't overfeed them, they're gonna look healthy. And I'm happy with ProPlan. I know a lot of people, they don't like Purina, but I was struggling with finding a kibble that worked for my entire group of dogs, because I don't really want to buy 3-4 bags of kibble. I found that ProPlan was one of the only kibbles that I could feed to everyone, that everyone seemed like they were happy on. Coats wise, I would have to say I probably had less dander when I did just straight raw, but I also had a very hard time keeping a good weight on with just raw. I always say it's the Italians, they have to have carbohydrates. So, right. Pasta. So, and that's what I did. To keep on a little bit of additional weight, I would have to throw in pasta or rice. And if you're feeding rice, then you have to blend it, or you're overcooking it because you have to explode it because they can't digest rice in the way that we digest it. So it's definitely a process to feed raw. And I believe that that's why most have gone towards the meal, is because they do have such a deep, hard body. And then on top of it, just temperament-wise, they all feel a lot. And if you can look under the skin, because that's what I tell people, I'm not scared of the skin. I look under it, and then I use it accordingly if it has the body that I'm after. The structure is so important, and I look for a solid structured dog, and then I outcross, within my breed, and they go back to what is more natural. They have a nice strong bite, and I think it surprises people. Some of the dogs, I find it really depends on that dog. Some of them at first are a little bit more defensive, so you have to kind of find how they work, and you have to make sure that you don't bring out the dark side of it, and that they understand why we're doing it. And then we have to fully bomb-proof them, because I find that a lot of people go out and they work dogs inappropriately, Mastiffs, Neos. They want to see them really come unglued, really be hard and sharp, and then you expect to take them back home, and the dog doesn't even understand what happened. So you have to go through the process. And I always tell people, if you're going to train with personal protection, especially with Mastiffs, if you're going to open that door, you have to fully walk through it and shut it, because this isn't a 50-pound dog. This is a 150-pound dog. And if you're teaching them to bite people, you need to teach them when it's appropriate to bite.
Mm-hmm.